Hello, everyone. Good to see you out, or not out, I guess, at home, and joining us today. I see three of you out there, so that's great to see. Four. All right. Supposed to keep track of how many of you I'm seeing. So great to see you, and I hope things are going well. You'll notice on the Google Classroom, I have posted a new assignment, sort of a quiz. This is a Google Doc that you should be getting a copy of in your window there. I'm just going to double check that it showed up. So it's a copy that, yeah, so it's a new assignment, and you should have each gotten your own version of it, and you can fill out that at your leisure, however you want to do that. And that's yeah. So everything we've covered up till now is pretty much covered in that quiz. So please complete it uh, whenever you like. I think I put the due date as Friday. All right. So if you have any questions, please don't be afraid to drop them in the chat as we go. And we're going to finish up a couple of things here and move to the next idea or two. And yeah, then the next sort of the last sort of piece of this unit is a little bit of it's a little choppy, I would say. I think that there's sort of modules that I have that I want you to know about, but I'm not quite sure what order to put them in, so they all just kind of end up lying at the end of the unit. So whatever, we'll get through it, and then we'll be on to the genetics unit, probably the week we get back. So after spring break, we will start the genetics unit ASAP. I'm really not sure what's going to happen. I've been watching the COVID announcements as they come, and it looks like, I mean, the growth rate in Manitoba is slow. So we did just get one more infection. So it's possible that they're going to let us go back to school, but I don't know. It's going to be really interesting what happens next in 2 weeks. I bet. I really feel like we're not going to get any updates for another week or so in terms of what exactly we want to do. I think we're going to have to wait to see if this infection rate increases any faster. We our province has self-isolated early, so that's really good. Now, what I would like to think about actually is go back to this table and let's think about what if COVID-19 does it fit into this table at all? Um, you know, Overproduction for a virus is really is going to be dependent on infection. So that's really what we're addressing. Like when we went into self isolation, we can think that we're trying to target the overproduction of that virus. We're trying to reduce the amount of space it has, the amount of of infectable bodies, reduce its reproduction. If we reduce its reproduction, then we can hopefully, maybe we're not going to get extinction, but we might get slowness. One of the reasons we're not hitting extinction probably is uh, is because of competition, right? So where if we were to just self-isolate, we could think that we were going to be in this sort of situation, a situation of equilibrium. The virus would be found in various bodies, but it would spread slowly and would probably not change very much. But if we also have good health care, then we can think that we are going to move up into this level where that healthcare can be thought of as competition or thought of as danger, right? Good healthcare is dangerous to a virus because good healthcare means that the individuals are in good health and they can defend themselves and kill the virus off in their bodies. So that's really the goal, I think, is what is, if we had to put it in terms, it's not quite the same because we're dealing with viruses, which are sort of, living in our bodies, but we are kind of, kind of thinking about this evolutionary model and how it kind of applies. Now, notice if we did not go into self-isolation and we didn't have the resources to provide everyone with good health care, then we would not then our population would not be putting the virus in the danger zone. So there would be no competition for that virus, and it would be able to overproduce. It doesn't really need, we doesn't even need the variation. It could just be COVID-19 and doesn't even have to change. Viruses don't change particularly well, but we are going to still see population growth if it's allowed to overproduce. So if we don't physically isolate, they're now saying we should go with physical isolation, not social isolation. If we didn't physically isolate, then we would be allowing the virus to overproduce. So hopefully Manitoba caught on real quick, and we're going to be uh, forcing that virus into some situations that are not going to be good for it. Um, can we extinct the virus? Well, maybe not extinct it, but we can certainly shrink it. Uh, so maybe we should actually put a little note here that I did say extinction, but maybe we should say something like after population reduction. Oops, put that back, and we'll put that down here as well. So that's kind of cool. I thought that would be a cool little way to start out, is by thinking about how natural selection as a theory is actually powerful, right? It has to theories have to have predictive power. So we really want to think about theories as uh, not just being theories, but having predictive ability. Okay. Whoops. All right. So let's get back. Let's get back into it. So we just started talking about equilibrium at the end. We've already talked about equilibrium a lot when we talked about the conditions for equilibrium, the conditions for no change. So evolution is not continuous. It very well can happen in waves. It will depend on the environment. Um, and and we might also find that within a population there might be variants that are not different enough uh, to make one phenotype more successful than the other. There may not be significant pressure to alter the success of one variation over another either. So this is one of the reasons why why naturally naturally, if we looked at a pack of wolves, we might notice different patternings on their fur, or different colorations um, that are all sort of, different shades of brown, perhaps. Or I'm trying to think of some animals, even like, even if you go and look at a grouping of trees, say like some fern trees or something. Let me just see if I can pull up like a tree line, right? So let's look at like a tree line, uh, images. So like, let's look at this tree line, right? So when we look at the tree line, we can, these are all pretty much the same tree. So this is a natural little population that we're looking at here. Little population, I don't know. So let's shrink that and bring that over here. So here we have a little population of a tree. And when we look at the tree line, we can even see that there is variation in the heights of the trees, right? So we've got some heights, some of this is perspective, but there is a little bit of difference. There are variations in height. Not huge variations, but there are variations. And what we can think about in this case is that the idea is that these populations, the variation in height of the trees is now at the point where there's no more selection. They're relatively equal in success. The amount of sunlight that this tree is getting compared to this one is essentially the same. And it's not, even if there is a difference in the amount of sunlight, it's maybe balanced by some other factor, like, this tree gets more sunlight, you know, gets more sunlight, but needs more nutrients. We gotta pick a short one. I don't know, like this one. Less sun, but less nutrients. So when comparing these two trees, you know what? I'm gonna go with let's go with this one. It looks nice and short, and yeah. So this way we can sort of say that these trees have a balance. They've reached a sort of balancing point where we can call these trees in equilibrium. There's not going to be enough pressure on the system to cause the trees to grow any taller, or to shrink it, to sort of narrow up this distribution. We are going to get now. We can kind of think about this as out of our population with our height here, we're going to get something that looks like this, right? So we've got sort of, let's call this number, this one is tall and short, right? So maybe this one's over here and this one's over there. This is T and this is S, right? And we're going to have everything in between. We add up all the heights and we're going to find some sort of average tree height. But we won't be able to shrink it down anymore because there are benefits and drawbacks to each of the traits. Taller trees need more energy. Shorter trees need less energy, but they don't get as much sunlight. And in this way, we're going to get a variation, and natural selection won't be able to really won't be able to narrow that unless there's some other pressure or unless the environment changes. But at this point, these are in equilibrium. They don't have the variations are not extreme enough that the tall trees are all succeeding and the short ones are not. So natural selection is not a constant effect. It's not all the time. It's sort of an on and off kind of thing. For a large-scale change to happen, stress on the population must occur continuously over a long period of time. So, for example, there's been suggested that there was a increase in oxygen levels between the Triassic and the Cretaceous, and this is where we got these really monstrously sized dinosaurs, is because now there was more oxygen. This allowed for the support of larger organisms. One theory. Was it the correct one? Well, it works. It fits our story at least. So, let's put the little note here. So the continuous increase in oxygen, let's just go all O2 levels, made it easier for larger organisms to live. And these organisms also had an advantage in terms of reproductive success because they were harder to predate. So they're harder prey. Um, so this, of course, this created larger larger prey, which uh, which encouraged evolution of larger predators. T. rex, etc. T. rex, Allosaur, Carnotorosaurus. My son was a big dinosaur kid, so dinosaur head. So I had to learn all these dinosaur names. Um, but this is continuous. This is millions of years of oxygen getting increased and increased by the presence of plants. These plants then they feed off of CO2, so larger organisms produce more CO2, so that gives the plants more CO2 to consume, allows for more oxygen to be produced, etc. And then so animals can get larger and larger. Now, if this is environmental change is not present, then especially on the short term, especially in short-term history, there's going to be very little change to the gene pool. Um, Now, an example of a body plan that's been in sort of an equilibrium state for a long time is the turtle or the tortoise. This body plan of the low round bodies with shells on their backs has been around for millions and millions of years. So we can kind of think of this as a body plan that is successful in a variety of environments. Right, so this same thing with the shark body. Shark body is awesome at cruising through the water and catching prey. So it's a body plan that's been around for a long time, and the body structures have been in equilibrium essentially. The turtle body plan is has been successful regardless of environmental changes. So the the general plan has been in equilibrium for eons. Can we use eons? How long is an eon? I'd love to say the word eon just because it sounds fun. Eons. Eons is an indefinite period of time, often a period exaggerated for humorous or rhetorical effect. Well, in astronomy and geology, it's a unit of time equal to 1 billion years. Okay, well, I can't say that for millions of years. It's probably like tens of millions of years at this point. So, or it's definitely tens of millions of years. It's at least like 60 million years that we've had tortoise sort of body shapes. You can see that there are some variations, of course, different variations that have allowed for success. Um, but even this body plan has later on been an analogous body plans in other organisms, right? The idea of like sort of a scaly protective back. Trying to think of an analogous organism, but that's not like a direct descendant. Armadillos kind of have that going for them, right? They have sort of scales on the back and the soft underbelly. Uh, yeah, probably lots of bugs we could think about. Definitely there's lots of shelled creatures that have hard backs like snails and things that also have effective body plans. And so this is examples of things that are successful, and then even with major changes to the environment. I mean, the world is not the same as it was 60 million years ago, but this body plan has been successful. New body plans have arisen in those 600 years. Oh yeah, Ankylosaurus. There's a good one. Yeah, very similar sort of analogous body plan. Very good call. I like that. Um, Big Ankylosaurus fan over here. So I was gonna suggest Bulbasaur, but that doesn't. That's not that's not a good example. Okay. Uh, so let's see. Where are we at? Yeah. So yeah, there's lots of other examples of organisms that have been in equilibrium, and what else can I say about that? And then sometimes you'll find things that have been in equilibrium for a long time because there isn't any pressure to change, and they might even actually they might even transfer between species. And so that'll be on the next slide or the next page or so. I'll show you an example of something that all animals carry that is left over and sort of an equilibrium structure, a leftover that does not have any pressure to change, and so it's present in most animals, even though it's not a particularly uh, efficient thing to have. So here are the summary of the ideas. Organisms produce more offspring than can survive. Therefore, organisms compete for limited resources. Individuals of a population vary extensively, and much of this variation is heritable. That means uh, the next generation can get that trait or get that variation. Those individuals that are better suited to local conditions survive to produce offspring, and over multiple generations, the population will change such that, or two with more, will uh, change with more individuals. I'm just going to use my little whiteout pen here. Will change with more individuals inheriting the adaptations that are best suited for their environment. So the traits that are good. Now note that if you inherit a bunch of adaptations, then the population now has gotten better at living in that environment. So this creates even more competition. So for example, in a very closed system like the closed system like Australia, this is one of the reasons Australia is prone to having some of the most venomous snakes in the world and other dangerous organisms, is that as soon as one organism or one group of an organism develops a trait that's useful, then that becomes probably the dominant species with their dominant trait, and then they start to compete with each other, and then that trait becomes more enhanced if it's particularly effective. So let's do a little example. Venomous snakes. Venomous snakes. I will learn how to spell venomous one day. Venomous. 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 I'm just going to do a little venomous. Is venomous. Okay, it should have worked. Venomous snakes. Oh, okay, now I can. Snakes. So the venomous trait or snake venom is initially a initially venom was similar to an enzyme produced in the stomach, but once it became an effective adaptation, venomous snakes competed with each other. So the venom became more and more deadly. So initially, venom appears to have been an enzyme similar to an enzyme that we produce in our stomachs. All organisms sort of chordates seem to produce in their stomach. But now, once it started being produced in the mouth, then now it gave an advantage. Um, it gave an advantage on hunting and catching prey, and it became more and more. It became now a competition between venom snakes. So venomous snakes compete with each other, and the one that can mutate that venom to be even more, or the variations that had even more deadly versions of that enzyme became even more successful, and then those ones became more successful, and it gets compounded each generation. That out of the 100 that out of the thousands of snakes, the 1% that have very deadly venom, they get to reproduce that much more, and so the population drifts towards more and more venom, and the ones without venom are less and less successful. This also creates pressure on their prey. Their prey becomes more and more resistant to venom. There's the honey badger that can be bit by a poisonous snake, and then just kind of and it's able to absorb the poison and not be affected. Let's see, honey badger resistance snake venom. Oh, sorry. It has thick skin, so actually that's what causes it. So the honey badger tends to have this thick skin. It has an extra chunk of skin in its back around its neck where the snakes usually bite, and that thick loose skin is resistant to the teeth of those snakes, so they don't absorb the venom into their blood. Now, natural selection versus artificial selection, both of these are mechanisms of change in the gene pool that are largely caused by the non-random mating and mutation breeding. So, mutation breeding here is something we'll talk about in our later DNA unit. But mutation breeding, what I mean here is the mating of mutation carrying individuals. So mutation breeding is a common technique in farming. It's been used since about the 1800s or 1890s or something, that early 1900s for sure. We realized that if we exposed different seeds of plants to either radiation or poison, we could cause those to have a higher chance of mutating, and then we would breed out the seeds, or we'd grow up the seeds, and the seeds that had the most changes, we would then continue to breed those seeds and discard the other ones. So this is one of the ways that we are able to increase the size of fruits and vegetables over very short periods of time, is simply by picking the mutants and breeding them together more directly. We can see some mutation breeding in our potato diagram phylogenetic tree earlier, where we see the potato go from being a diploid, having 2 copies of every chromosome, to being a tetraploid, where would have 4 copies of every chromosome. And that was simply done by simple farming practices of picking the most effective mutated versions of the plant and allowing those ones to be the ones that reproduce over several generations. Just trying to clean up some of my wires here because I need to plug in a little bit better. Okay. So artificial selection, this is where humans take the active role. They reduce the randomness of change. So they are exploiting the agents of change. They're exploiting particularly the non-random mating and mutation. Sometimes, like in crossbreeding, we apply gene flow as well. So we do this in for dog breeding, for example. My golden doodle. Here, just wait 1 second. Sit, sit. Okay. Good girls. All right. Pearl, up, 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 up. Okay, this is Pearl. How are we doing here? Betty, Betty, come here. Okay, so Pearl is that guy Darwin. He married his cousin, so that's mutation. That's non-random breeding, I guess, Caitlin. Uh, here is Pearl. She's a mutt. She's got a bunch of different dog breeds in her, and so she's got lots of different things going on. She's got some sort of scrappy hair here that she got from some schnauzer, and she has sort of the ears. The ears are supposed to be a little bit of shepherd in there, and a little bit in the eyes. And then she's a big fat girl. So she's got the short corgi body as well. So she's really an example of mixing a bunch of gene pools. So lots of gene flow happening here, mixing up lots of different things together um, to make this sort of this mix. And so we compare that to Betty. Come on, girl. So this is Betty. And so Betty is a golden doodle. Yes, you're very pretty. And so she very much has the ears of a golden retriever for sure. But you can see that she's inherited a lot of the different fur of the poodle. So she has this sort of natural curl that we definitely don't see in a retriever. Usually retrievers have very, very straight hair. She actually has retrievers have fur, which means the hair kind of falls out. Betty has hair, so we actually have to cut her hair. It doesn't fall out very easily, so it makes poodles allergenic and she's sort of semi-hypoallergenic, so she doesn't have a lot. She loses a little bit of fur, but she does have sort of a mixture of traits from her two parents. So that was a very direct, non-random mating, kind of mixed in with a little bit of gene flow there. We're mixing two specific populations together to get a mixture of traits. Okay, good girl. So there we go. I've always wanted to bring my dogs into class, so I'm happy to be able to do that today. Very fun. All right, I finally did it. I got to bring my dogs in to talk about artificial breeding. Now the interesting thing is that when we talk about when we talk about I'm seeing some talk about interbreeding in a population. So if Darwin, if he marries his cousin, even if it's a third or fourth cousin, it turns out that the amount of damage to a gene a group or to a family from interbreeding is actually not as high as it's been sort of stigmatized. It's more of an effect on a population. So when we have lots of interbreeding for a long period of time, that's where we could have some problems. But if it's Darwin and his third cousin, sure, maybe they're going to be they're going to have some traits that are carried forward, or a higher chance, a small increase in the amount of recessive traits they're going to have for their children, but it's probably almost negligible. Um, I think I read a paper recently about or an article or something about how as stigmatized as interbreeding is, it is not as damaging to the population unless it's through multiple generations. So when we look at something like the current state of the Dalmatian has had a very long history of interbreeding. It's a very small pool of breeding partners, and now the Dalmatian line is quite weak, with higher rates of cancers and higher rates of dysplasias and blindness, and the smarts are not on the high list for um, are not they are considered one of the least smart dogs out there. Okay, my son is adding in some extra extra statements here. Okay, what do we have? Mixing. I was gonna get into mixing different dog breeds. Okay. So in natural selection, meanwhile, so natural selection, um, the change is slower, and and may be uh, may be non-continuous. It may be incontinuous. Non-continuous, is that the word? Didn't like incontinuous, so let's go with non-continuous. It may stop and go. There's some random chance involved, right? It's slower. You could have changes that go one way and then come back and then go again. So there's a very it's a much slower process. Uh, Depends on lots of random effects that could interfere. So random chance may interfere with the process or the progress of natural selection, as so example, if a random event interferes with an adapted individual finding a mate, then this could remove this trait from the gene pool. Right, so maybe there's you have a group of deer, and they graze on two sides of a river using a bridge of rocks, or yeah, let's say they cross the bridge at a low spot where there are rocks, and then one day there's a storm or a flooding, flash flood, and the path between the two sides of the two sides of this river are closed off. Suddenly, if some of the adapted individuals are trapped on one side of the river, and there's not enough of them to actually form a mating colony or a mating group, then they'll just die off over there. And as they die off, they remove those genes from the gene pool. So a random event could always interfere and cause this and slow this natural selection process. And this is one of the ideas about when we're investigating investigating an example of evolution. One of the things that evolutionary biologists will be looking at is it random that they ended up with this trait, or was there any random events that interfered with this trait or the development of a trait? Was it so? Does genetic drift play a role? Certainly, if the population is very large, then genetic drift is probably not the case. But if it's a small population, then certainly genetic drift events or random events could be important to determining what kind of traits are developed. And it could even be that you have a random event like a random extinction event or something that leaves behind just randomly some organisms that are adapted. When we have the extinction of the dinosaurs, it might be, there might be some random components to consider about the success of mammals. So mammals diversify immediately after the dinosaurs are extinct, and the extinction of the dinosaurs is sort of a random event, and then it causes a situation, a change in the environment that was sudden, and so there's going to be this sudden drop off in the number of dinosaur, the number of large predator, and then mammals pretty much are they're not really under any selection. They just kind of reproduce, and they fill in this gap. Now that there's all these dead giant lizards everywhere, and what used to be hunting grounds for these giant lizards are now hunting grounds for mammals. And probably in this case, we're talking about plant hunting. These early mammals are just hunting for plants. As they hunt for plants, some of them develop a taste for meat, or they might already be carnivores. They hunt down the ones that are eating plants. Those ones can get bigger because there's so much plants that are freely available to them now. There's no longer competing with giant dinosaur. And so then the mammals get larger and larger and larger until we have those giant sloths and the giant armadillos and things that Darwin saw on his voyage. Okay, so if you're stressing a population under natural selection, then there's going to be some sort of direction to that change. And so that's what we're going to talk about next, we have to kind of get our head around this idea. I am going to draw a whole bunch of these things, these population curves, right? It's probably not a bad idea to get comfortable with the population curve if you're going to university, because this is how some teachers grade. They establish that this is the curve of grades in a classroom, and they say, okay, so 0, 100%, and they say, hey, I should get one person that gets 100%. I should have another 2 people that get 95%. I get 6 people that are getting 90%, and then there's probably a whole 40 people or 50 people, whatever size class is. If this is like a 100-person class, I can't do stats in my head like this, but anyways, they essentially are expecting they plan their classes around the idea that there is about 30% over here that get a fail, that get Fs. So courses at the university, some professors believe that they should follow this kind of population curve. I have applied it myself when I taught at university. I ended up not applying it and saying then going, well, I don't think it's fair that this many people are failing. But when I did have high numbers of fails when I taught at U of M, I did look at it and go, well, at least it's better than the curve. And so the curve has informed a lot about our world. So we're going to talk a lot about population curves. You got to get comfortable with these population curves and what they mean. So evolution should be random, since the origin of the change is a mutation to the genome. But life is not fair is sort of the guiding principle, right? Survival of the fittest. Every allele essentially has a degree of fitness. So we can actually look at this and say, at our population curve and think about, in some cases, this is going to be fitness. And so unfit might be down here, and this might be highly fit. This might be fit. So only a small number of your population is fit, and a large number of them, and some of them are unfit, and some of them are kind of fit, right? Like the whole middle section is all people that they're doing okay. They're not doing amazing. But they're also not failing. So that's sort of the middle part of this. So selection occurs when this difference is made significant by a stress on the population. one part of the population produces less offspring than the other. The factors that cause natural selection uh, to occur can be thought of pressures or stresses on the population. Any factors that are making life unfair is what we want to talk about. Evolution by natural selection is slow, therefore the pressure needs to be subtle, or the change will be random and less likely to lead to adaptation. This is where the sort of also other aspect of this conversation between genetic drift and natural selection happens is what is a subtle stress, right? One of the key points we put out a long time ago was that genetic drift really has to be something that affects 50% of the population. So we can kind of say that that natural selection would be something that affects less than 50% of the population. If less than 50% of the population is affected by some sort of factor that reduces their success, then that might be a natural selection factor, maybe. And if it hits more than 50% of the population, it might be genetic drift factor, where we're looking at sort of a possible uh, extinction event or a possible large change to the genome pool. So there's a couple of ways that a population could be affected. One effect is if the two extremes of a trait are unfavorable. So this is called stabilizing selection. So in this case, I'm not sure if I want this graph up here. I'm a little worried that it's going to be confusing, so I'm just going to erase that. So in this case, we could think about something like human birth weight or tree height, right? So I'm just going to pull up a human birth weight graph because they are available everywhere. So human birth weight. Here. Okay, here's our example so if we look at this graphic right here, this is where probably one of the places I got this idea is in the case of human birth weight, we can look at the relationship to infant mortality. And so if babies are born too large or too small, they have a higher chance of dying on childbirth. And so this causes selection against the two extremes of that situation. So I'm just going to put that to the side, and I'm going to give myself an extra page here so that I can throw that graph in there. So here in these two regions, so in these regions here, we have selection against. So what we're saying is that that as long as your birth weight is in that middle zone between 5 and 9, you have a higher percentage chance of survival. Does that mean there are no babies that are born over 10 pounds? Of course not. Mortality rate just goes up, right? I think I just had a friend who had a baby that was in the 10-pound range. It's completely possible, especially with modern medicine. But in the past, in say like the 1800s or 1400s or 200 BC, right? Those infant mortality rates were much higher. So we can imagine that even that, back then we would have our infant mortality curve would have probably been, more like this, and we would have had only a very small range of babies that would be viable. So this is this range in the middle here are the ones who are going to have the highest chance of survival. Survival is the first step in reproduction. You need to survive to reproduce. Reproduction and the impact on reproduction is what natural selection plays off of. So that's stabilizing selection. So we think about mid-range phenotypes being favored Well, the extreme values are unfavored. So average value trait, and it selects against those with extremes. Now, in some cases, there might be a favorable selection for one extreme over the other. So this is values for the trait that at one extreme. This should say that. This shouldn't say that. This should say at. Trait at one extreme of the distribution. What page is that? 42. And it selects against both the average and the opposite extreme. So in the case of antibiotic resistance, we can think that down here we have not resistant, and then up here we have some resistance. And notice that as the curve shifts to the right, that some resistance will become very resistant. And it eventually become completely resistant. So for example, with something like polysporin, if polysporin is the pressure on S. aureus, which is a bacteria we find on our skin, 20, 30 years ago, there was everybody was applying polysporin, and most of the bacteria were being killed by that polysporin. But nowadays, if you take any sample of S. aureus and try to use polysporin on it, you'll find that the resistance is much lower. This is a great point at which we should watch that. We should spend some time watching that plate of E. coli growing. So I'm just going to pull that up and put it in the live stream. It's already in our video library, but I'm going to pull it up and drop it in the notes here. So just 1 second. Where would I find that? Evolution. If you have a chance to watch Great Transformations, it is possibly my favorite one of these videos that I have. The Mega Petri Dish is the video I want you to watch, though. This is we should almost do a watch along with this video one day. Okay. So please watch this video about the Petri dish. This is where they made a Petri dish with increasing levels of bacteria, or increasing levels of antibiotic. And you can see how that bacteria has to fight against the higher and higher concentrations. And so that's very much a directional selection. Now, each colony of the bacteria undergoes its own path towards that end goal. So goal. Evolution's not goal oriented. Sorry. But I highly recommend that video. If you also want to watch Great Transformations, I also highly recommend it. I might even post an assignment for it because it is a very essential video. Did we watch Great Transformations at some point? I don't think we did, but we might have watched a piece of it. I watch it so many times every year that I kind of lose track. So disruptive selection is another example. I don't think many people know what a limpet is, but I'll show you what limpets are. So images. They're a type of barnacle essentially, and they come in a variety of colors. And I'm looking for the one where it shows the white and black ones. Here are the white limpets. You can see those there. And I thought there was a dark limpet somewhere. Here's a dark limpet, I guess. So these are both varieties of the same species. But you can see that they come in a variety of colors, and those colors are typically found on rocks and at origins where they're needed to be that color. We don't typically find too many limpets in the middle range because usually there's not much advantage of being in the middle color. The other example is in the size of male salmon. So male salmon size. And so we have small and large. Male salmon don't, one of the controlling factors on their size is from the sort of Y chromosome sort of gene. And so I'm getting feedback from my previews being enabled. Okay, sorry, I figured out that flashing was related to having my preview open on a different window. So that seems to go away. It'll go away in a second as soon as I realize that preview reactivated itself. Okay, it looks better. Okay, so in salmon, we found out that the scientists discovered that being large being large allowed you to push other salmon out of the way when you go to mate, and being really tiny allowed you to get in between the other males and faster. But being middle-sized interfered with your success. So small salmon males can slip in between the others to fertilize eggs. Large salmon can push out the others to fertilize, but medium males are not good at either trick. Let's call it tactic. So that's why salmons tend to fall into two different distinct groups. Let's go through some examples tomorrow. It's been our hour, and you have that video link there. If you are really interested in watching, I do recommend the Great Transformations video, which I am getting a copy of right now. I think we've watched some of it before, but it never hurts to watch it again. So highly recommend that one. Otherwise, let's talk to you tomorrow. This is great. I'm really happy to see so many of you on the stream. So let's keep it up and keep positive. Things are going great. I'm happy to talk to all of you. Maybe later in the week I was thinking about maybe Friday trying to do a Google Meet. And so in that case, I will post a link on Google Classroom. I'll try to post it the night before so you can set up your software and stuff. But you use either the Google Hangouts app or the Google Meet app, and log in again with, you can use any login, but any Google login. I recommend you use your class login, and then we can actually have a conference meeting. So like we can all sort of talk to each other, and we can see if there's any questions. Because at this point, I've got a little bit of extra fun stuff near the end here about adaptations and niche differentiation. And then I think we might want to conclude this unit with a project instead of concluding with a test, simply because of the way that we're situated. So that's what I'm starting to think about right now, is what would be a cool project to look into for evolution and designing that, and then maybe hopefully having that in place by the time we go to spring break, which is next week. And then coming back and working on genetics, get a week of genetics in, and then hopefully the school reopens. But we'll see. I mean, this social distancing thing, we're pulling the overpopulation rug out from under the carpet, from out under the feet of COVID-19. So it's really, it is in our benefit to stay separated. So we'll see how successful this is going to be. But I'm still having fun. Hope you're. I really appreciate having a live chat that's very active. So please don't feel afraid to share more ideas or questions, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Have yourself a great day.